Hi, everybody. This week's topic is creation myths. Stories about how the universe or the earth and its inhabitants came to be. Now, we create these stories because we seek to explain our origins and define our cultural traditions. Creation stories are the things that make us unique and identify us as being part of a specific culture. So they give us identity as cultures and as individuals. So at the beginning of our discussion of creation stories or creation myths, we need to consider three key terms. The first is cosmogony. Now, this word comes from the Greek cosmos, meaning order, and Genesis, meaning birth. A cosmogony is a story of how the cosmos began and developed. An example of this is the Hebrew creation story. In that story, Elohim, Yahweh, creates the cosmos from nothing by speaking it into being. Then, of course, there are stages in the continuation of the evolution of the universe. And the final stage is humankind and the creation of humankind. So a cosmogony gives us a story or a set of stories about how the entire universe comes into being. Our second term is a theogony. A theogony is a story about the origins of the gods. The Enuma Elish is a good example of this. This is a Babylonian tale that explains the birth of the gods from the primal waters. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Our third term is anthropogony. Anthro, of course, means human. So this is a story of the origins of human beings. If we're looking for examples of anthropogony or stories about the origins of humans, we can often find good examples in North America's indigenous myths. Emergence myths of indigenous cultures of North America describe journeys of first peoples from their origins in the earth to their new homes on the surface. So they're good examples of anthropogony. The coming into being of humankind. Now, it may sometimes be the case that we'll have a cosmogony, a theogony, and an anthropogony all mixed together into a variety of stories or into one big story. So we could have the origins of the universe, the origins of the gods and goddesses, and the origins of humans all coming together in a big story. Or they may be separated out. Usually it's the case that we'll find a cosmogony and a theogony in a culture. There are some cultures that don't have anthropogony or stories about humankind, which is interesting, I think. Now, when we come to anthropogony, human beings are created for many reasons. They may be created to serve the gods. They may be created to rule over the dominion of the earth, perhaps. Or they may simply be created to add variety to the universe, to the cosmos, as such. Sometimes they're created just for fun. This may also be the case. Usually, creation myths of any kind involve the evolution of order from a state of chaos. So we usually have a starting point, and that starting point is a void or an emptiness or perhaps a flow of dust as such. And from that, an order is developed for the way the universe is structured. So creation myths often involve the creation of the world, as I mentioned, the creation of humankind. Sometimes there is a fall of humankind from a state of perfection. Sometimes there is a struggle in heavens. There are battles that may ensue between, in heaven, between various groups of immortals as such, for dominion and control of the universe as such. That may also happen. We have all different kinds. As I mentioned before, creation stories can be individual or cultural. So they might indicate an inner truth about a person, an individual as such, or they might indicate a truth about the culture that they describe. We often celebrate individual creation stories in the form of birthdays, right? And then as cultures, we celebrate creation and creation stories in myth. Creation stories are metaphors for birth in a larger sense. Yes, so back to that individual birthday. The creation myth is a representation of the birth of the culture. So just a larger scale story of birth, okay? And we see patterns and motifs that develop throughout these stories. Okay, for example, we may have a primal egg, or we may have primal waters. Primal, the word primal, is defined as something that is an early part of evolutionary development, or a part of a fundamental development of something. So when we talk about a primal egg, or sometimes it's called a cosmic egg, we're referring to an egg that is a fundamental aspect of the evolution of the culture. If we're talking about primal waters, then we're referring to water that is a fundamental aspect of the evolution of that culture. Motifs like the primal egg or the primal waters remind us of the Great Mother, the earth as the giver of a form of life, or the water as a giver of a form of life. Motifs like the egg or the water are often the embodiment of maternal or feminine energy. The idea is that nothing can be born without maternal energy. And that we see that persisting throughout the creation myths that we come into contact with. So the cosmos may be born out of nothingness. Or if, in a general sense, if we're talking about cosmogony, or if we're talking about anthropogony in a specific individual, we could say that a hero, for example, may be born of a virgin. Regardless of the type of story, whether talking about cosmogony, theogony, anthropogony, whether we're talking about a story that indicates or describes the evolution of the universe and the development of the universe, or we're talking about a story that describes the birth of an individual. All of these creation stories are metaphors for the awakening of consciousness from the unconscious. The creation of any human being in any story of anthropogony is seen as a step towards conscious awareness. And we will see that throughout the myths as we go forward. Human beings were created to name things and to be namers. And we will notice throughout the creation stories that we look at that words and naming are extremely important. To label objects is to document them and to give them a kind of significance. If we are using words, then we are bringing things into consciousness and we're bringing things into existence. And this is a motif we'll see throughout. Creation myths establish our reason for being. They indicate how or why we are significant. And in particular, when it comes to human beings, they indicate our place in the overall structure of the universe. When individuals or cultures are unwell, they often return to their creation stories to become well, to become grounded again, to understand themselves, to reorient their identity. And so therefore then their existence is justified. If we are part of nature's wholeness, and if humans are a part of all creation, why might we have a fall from grace? Or, as I mentioned before, a fall from perfection to imperfection? Why is this sometimes part of creation myths? I think this is to indicate the cycle of life and death that is inevitable for human beings. The moment we are brought into existence, we begin dying. This might seem like a bit of a sad fact and not one that we want to dwell on for too long. But the reality is that the moment something is brought into existence, it starts along the path of disintegration. This is true of anything that comes into existence, and it is certainly true of humans. The moment we are born is the moment we begin to die. And so I think in a way, a fall from grace or a movement from perfection to imperfection symbolizes this inevitability or this essentiality of a life and death cycle. Inevitably, as we move forward, we will disintegrate and decay. This is a fact of life. With every birth, there must be death. Some of the creation myths indicate that for us in this way. So there are 5 types of creation myths indicated in your textbook, brought to us by, I believe, Charles Long, and then mentioned again in Leeming, right? So I'll just outline them for you here. Our first one is ex nihilo creation. Creation from nothing. And this usually involves a creator who brings the universe into existence by thought, word, or deed. Or perhaps by molding humans, as from clay, or who brings them about as a result of their own secretions, from their own secretions in the body, or who brings them about from a dismembered body, parts of the earth, perhaps part of a supernatural being, parts of a god. This last example is known as the mirror motif, and it comes from Norse mythology and the myth of the first frost giant and the way in which his body is dismembered in order to create the world. So ex nihilo creation, or creation from nothing, often involves a creator who brings things into existence out of the void. And there are a whole bunch of ways that the creator can do that. As I mentioned before, thought, word, and deed are really important. When humans come into the world and they name things, they bring things into existence. The same is often true for creators. They may think of the world and it's coming into existence, and it happens. We will notice the significance of this, particularly when we get to Indian philosophy and Indian myths later on. Thoughts are important. They help to form our world. And again, this is a theme that persists throughout myth. So our first type, ex nihilo creation, or creation from nothing. Our second type is creation from a pre-existing chaotic mix of primal realities, such as a cosmic egg or primeval waters. Primeval and primal have a very similar meaning here. If something is primal or primeval, it is an essential aspect or a fundamental aspect of evolutionary development. So its presence indicates creation and development. This is also sometimes called chaos creation. Okay. And here, oftentimes, when we think of examples, we refer to Chinese creation stories that involve a cosmic egg. The image of the fertile egg symbolizes the source of existence and the movement from oneness to differentiation. If we imagine an egg, a real egg in its natural form, if we imagine a real egg here, it has a yolk and a white and a shell. And when an egg is in its natural form, all of those elements are together. It's one egg. But when we crack the egg and we separate the yolk from the shell and the white, they are differentiated from each other. They become something else. And then there is something new that comes about. This is also one of the central tenets or central principles of many Eastern philosophies, that we may think we are separate and differentiated, but in essence, we are one. And so the egg is a great symbol of that. Our third type of creation story is creation from the union, separation, division, or sacrifice of primordial parents. This is also often called world parent creation. Usually, it's the separation of Earth Mother and Sky Father. As I mentioned before, the feminine and the maternal aspect of creation is often associated with the earth. And there is an understanding that nothing can really be created without that feminine energy. So usually this is the separation, as I said, of Earth Mother and Sky Father. When they're joined, there's no space for creation to occur. When they're joined, there's no space for parents to give birth. So they need to separate in order for that to happen. Once they're separated, there is space for evolution and creation. Now, an exception to this is Egyptian myth, Egyptian creation myth, in which Nut is the goddess of the sky and Geb is the god of the earth. Nut is the feminine energy. She's in this cultural tradition, and she is the sky. And Geb is that grounding energy. He is the earth. So this is in contrast to other traditions where we see that the god is the god of the sky. So that's the male energy, and the female energy comes from the earth. So this is our third type of creation myth. Our fourth type is creation from an opening in the earth. Emergence creation, this is called. And it is what it sounds like. Life comes from a womb in the earth. These are considered to be ascendance tales. So the key focus, ascending meaning going up, yes? And the key focus of these tales is the actual birthing process. So these tales are metaphorical in that they represent the birthing process from a dark, cramped womb into a light, bright, spacious, new land or new world. So the focus really is that birthing process here. We find many emergence myths, as I mentioned before, in the indigenous cultures of North America, North and Central America. And we will come to those later on. Our last type of creation myth is creation resulting from a dive into the depths of the primordial waters. So this is the opposite of the emergence myth. Emergence myths are ascendance myths, and earth diver creation myths are descendance myths. They do eventually ascend, but they have to go down to come up. This is called often earth diver creation. Life here comes from the primal waters. The world comes from a primal mound that surfaces when a deity, an animal, or a creature swims to the bottom of the waters and brings up some earth. The key focus here is the creation of the earth as a landmass. So the key focus here is that grounded energy that is associated with bringing the earth up from the water. So these are the 5 types of creation myth that Long indicates and that Leeming identifies for us. As we go through the myths in the textbook, we will discover the different ways in which the myths that we read are representative of these types.